Hello, and welcome to the Watcher's review of Logopolis, a story where the Master plans to blackmail the whole universe and the end of the tenure of the Fourth Doctor. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can be alerted to more content. The Doctor finally decides to make repairs to the TARDIS's chameleon circuits, leading him to the planet of Logopolis, who hold a secret in the survival of the universe that the Master intends to exploit. Logopolis is the final story of the Fourth Doctor era, bringing an end to Tom Baker's 7-year run in the role. His final season was a transition in refreshing the feel of the show, and ultimately to usher in the Peter Davison era. With Tom Baker in particular, it was a toning down of his character, which progressed with him becoming more serious as the season progressed, which brings us up to the Doctor's tone in Logopolis. We are introduced to the Doctor wandering the cloister room in a TARDIS, which houses the cloister bell, which rings in the event of upcoming wild catastrophes, which eventually rings and sets about a foreshadowing of events for the Doctor himself. In the meantime, the Doctor is in a reflective mood and has noticed that entropy is getting to the TARDIS in that it's aging and needs some repairs, and decides the first thing to address is the chameleon circuit, the device that should allow the TARDIS to blend in with its surroundings, and that has ceased working since the first story, An Unearthly Child. Initially on a journey back to Gallifrey, the Doctor tells Adric that he is to postpone that trip in order to make repairs, and that he initially meant to ask Romana before she decided to stay behind in E-Space at the conclusion of Warrior's Gate. And both him and Adric reflect on how much they will miss her, as well as K9, who also stayed behind. In order to repair the chameleon circuit, the Doctor explains to Adric how they will need to firstly travel to Earth and materialise an existing police box and take the mathematical measurements. They will then head to the planet of Logopolis, where the native Logopolitans dedicate their lives to doing mathematics through their minds without the use of computers, and have the ability to do block transfer computation, which allows them to create objects or actual space-time events. On arriving on Earth, the Doctor soon realises he hasn't materialised a police box, but the Master's TARDIS, and realises he escaped the events of the previous story, The Keeper of Traken, and deduced the Doctor's intentions and therefore anticipated his arrival. The TARDIS within a TARDIS scenario creates a recursive space-time anomaly, which eventually resolves itself. But the Doctor realises he can't go to Logopolis with the Master hiding in the TARDIS, so seeks out a way of flushing him out. It is here the Doctor comes across the Watcher, a ghostly figure who has been following the Doctor since landing on Earth. The pair hold a private conversation, resulting in the Doctor's mood changing significantly. This is coupled with a message from Nyssa on Traken, explaining how her father has disappeared. With a sudden sense of concern and urgency, the Doctor decides to go to Logopolis, even with the Master still hiding in his TARDIS, with a sense of knowing what is to happen to his own fate. Upon landing on Logopolis, they come across Tegan Jovanka, who has accidentally become embroiled in the saga by mistaking the TARDIS for an actual police box back on Earth, and subsequently got lost. Warmly greeted by the leader of the Logopolitans Monitor, they set about creating the block transfer computations to fix the TARDIS, which the Master sabotages it, causing it to shrink. Knowing about the danger the Master presents, he starts to distance himself from Adric, Tegan, and upon her arrival to Logopolis by the Watcher, Nyssa, and at times acts coldly with them without letting on why. The Doctor eventually works out that the Master trying to sabotage his repair plans on the TARDIS was merely a ruse in allowing him to gain access to Logopolis and the secret work they are carrying out. It is there that the Doctor works out that secretly the Logopolitans have been using their mathematics skills to prevent the collapse of the universe through entropy by creating charge vacuum emboitments, or CVEs for short, which allowed the entropy to pass through into other universes. The Doctor realises that this is what the TARDIS passed through when they ended up in E-Space earlier in the season. The Master's sabotaging in the Logopolitans' maths calculations results in the CVEs closing down, and entropy ravishing through the universe, and eventually affecting the planet of Logopolis and the inhabitants themselves. With no other option, the Doctor collaborates with the Master in order to prevent the universe from succumbing completely to entropy by finishing the Logopolitans' project of a permanent solution, letting the entropy carry on passing through the CVEs. With Logopolis all but destroyed, the pair travel back to Earth to use the Pharos Project, a program that humans are using to send messages to the stars, and see it as a way of sending the block transfer computations out to the universe to create the CVEs. The Pharos Project is also the model the Logopolitans copied to send out their block transfer computations to. It is at that point that the Master plans to take full advantage of the predicament the universe has fallen into and hold it to ransom. As a result, the Doctor sets out to disconnect a cable to stop the Master controlling the block transfer computation and saving the universe. This comes at a cost, however, as the Doctor finds himself hanging off the satellite, and unable to climb to safety, he falls. Surrounded by his three companions, he reassures them how it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for, to which the Watcher appears once more. Nyssa deduces that the Watcher was actually a future projection of the Doctor all along, and merges with him to kickstart the regeneration into the Fifth Doctor. Part of the success of Tom Baker's reign as the Doctor was the range he gave the character, and how it changed over his 7-year tenure. Alien, eccentric, comical and stern serious, some of these traits were stronger than others over time. During the Philip Hinchcliffe era, these traits were arguably at their most balanced, but during the Graham Williams era, the eccentric and comical aspects were heightened. This was in part down to the scripts, but also what Tom Baker was able to get away with in his performance. When John Nathan Turner took over as producer in 1980, the changes he brought involved a scaling down on the comedic aspects, which had started to become criticised. Over the course of season 18, you started to see a more serious Fourth Doctor, with the comical aspects in particular more scaled back than ever. The comedy, though, hadn't been completely eradicated, but over the course of the series it became more and more serious. So, by the time Logopolis came about, the comedic aspect of the Fourth Doctor had been reduced to the point where Tom Baker arguably gives his most serious performance. Similar to how the tone became more serious through season 18, the Doctor's tone becomes more and more serious as Logopolis progresses through the episodes. To begin with, he is in a reflective mood, finally coming to terms with Romana and K9 having now left, and how the TARDIS is overdue on having repairs carried out. He is still eccentric by the means he confuses Adric with his speedy dialogue, jumping from one subject matter to another, but still maintains that master and apprentice relationship that had started to become established. Even when questioned by the police during a scene where he is accused of the murders of a policeman and Tegan's Aunt Vanessa, he still maintains the playing the fool that Tom Baker is renowned for portraying. Upon the conversation with the Watcher, the Doctor becomes more serious, concerned and even colder than he has ever been during his incarnation, and as previously mentioned, you could put this down to the presence of the Watcher, making him aware, in particular, of his own fate, as well as the whole universe. Whilst I wouldn't say this is Tom Baker's strongest performance of the Doctor, it is a performance that underlines his talents as an actor in regard to range delivery, and how it reflects the general feel of the story. The production changes during season 18, coupled with his relationship with Romana actress Lalla Ward, and him knowing that he was leaving the role that he had defined, clearly had an effect on his performance not only in Logopolis, but over the whole of season 18. But like every other actor who had portrayed the Doctor, before or since, the desire to depart the role on a strong performance is evident here, and in the end is fitting to draw a conclusion to the Fourth Doctor era. This was Adric's fifth story, having debuted in season 18's Full Circle, which served as the first story of the E-Space trilogy. With his first story concluding him stowing away on board the TARDIS, his presence was largely unknown to the Doctor and Romana in his second story, State of Decay, and he had a reduced role in the final story of the E-Space trilogy, Warrior's Gate. Therefore, it is only with the Fourth Doctor's final two stories that Adric gets more screen time and evolving into his apprentice-style companion to the Doctor. It is implied that the Doctor has taught him a lot of things regarding the ability to read, write and understand numbers, various planets and the general workings of the TARDIS, which gets some elaboration in Logopolis. For the first two episodes he is largely by the Doctor's side, assisting in measuring the exterior of a police box and finding out how the Doctor acquired the TARDIS as well as the culture of the people of Logopolis. From the second half of the story, he becomes largely separated from the Doctor. Firstly, on Logopolis, when he assists Monitor in addressing the Master's sabotage that causes the TARDIS to shrink, before deciding to go looking for the Master with Nyssa, only to be stopped by the Doctor himself. The order to distance the Doctor from the danger of the Master and the entropy, he acts coldly towards them and ushers them into the TARDIS, which is then taken out of the universe by the Watcher. It is during that time that the Watcher wishes to speak privately to Adric, unbeknown to him that it is really the Doctor, and once it becomes apparent, you realise how much faith and trust the Doctor has put into Adric in regards to the well-being of the TARDIS. Once back on Earth, Adric with Nyssa in tow, and eventually Tegan watch on the events of the Doctor heading up the satellite dish at the Faros Project to save the universe and scupper the Master before witnessing plummeting back down to the floor. This is one of Adric's stories where the focus is more on the positive aspects of his character, primarily to him being the only companion interacting with the Doctor for the first half of the story, allowing these characters to develop more. For the second half of the story, his role becomes steadily more background to allow further development of Tegan and Nyssa, and the story itself focusing more on the screen time between the Doctor and the Master. For the remainder of Adric's tenure on the show, his character sees less screen time due to the increase of 3 companions travelling in the TARDIS, as well as a change in relationship with the Doctor, due to his 5th incarnation appearing more youthful, and the role of Master and Apprentice being less significant. This was Australian Tegan Javanka's debut story, and as such, she became the first Earth-born companion to travel with the Doctor since Sarah Jane Smith's departure almost 5 years earlier. When we are introduced to her, she is due to leave for her first day as an air stewardess and getting a ride from her Aunt Vanessa. En route to the airport, her aunt's car gets a flat tyre and pulls over at a lay-by where the Master's TARDIS, disguised as a police box, is waiting. Energetic and stubborn, she's determined to show her independence and reliability by attempting to change the tyre herself, but to no avail. After coming across the TARDIS disguised as a police box, she enters and finds herself in the Doctor's TARDIS, with it having recently materialised around the Master's. During this time, she becomes lost amongst the corridors of the TARDIS, as well as the cloister room with the Master hidden away, taunting her, making her distressed and frightened, but nevertheless determined. Eventually, she finds her way back to the console room when the Doctor and Adric first become aware of her presence, having just landed on Logopolis. Although she is on an alien planet, she doesn't seem bothered by this, and the Doctor feels compelled to bring her along due to her mention of Aunt Vanessa, who the Doctor realises is one of the corpses the police showed him, but doesn't reveal until later on that she was murdered by the Master. It is clear a lot of what is happening is going over Tegan's head, giving her a quick introduction to the events. Despite this, she is able to explain to Adric that Faros is Greek for lighthouse before explaining what a lighthouse is to him. Additionally, she speaks her mind to Monitor, viewing the conditions the Logopolitans work under in comparison to sweatshops, to which Monitor explains it is what they live for. When the Doctor orders his 3 companions into the TARDIS to get to a point of safety, Tegan at the last minute bails out to find the Doctor, as she regards him as her only chance to get back to Earth. She assists the Doctor in stripping down Monitor's computer before heading to Earth with the Master in his TARDIS. Once on Earth at the Faros Project, she acts as a distraction to the security guards to allow the Doctor and the Master to get up the satellite dish. From there, she is reunited with Adric and Nyssa in time to witness the Doctor regenerate. Tegan, being a human from contemporary Earth, brings back that role of a companion who asks the vital questions as what is happening, which acts as a form of representation to the audience, which had largely been absent from the show for a few years. However, she isn't a screaming, damsel in distress type companion, but more resilient and headstrong, if at times explosive in her personality. Unlike previous companions, her joining the TARDIS occurs less out of choice and more by accident, and makes it apparent that she wants to be back on Earth, which became part of a running theme during the 5th Doctor's opening season. Her introduction runs parallel to Dodo's from the 1st Doctor era, who, like Tegan, stumbled across the TARDIS, mistaking it for a real police box. but I don't think that was intentional given that Tegan received a bigger backstory and development. John Nathan Turner's decision to make the character Australian, as well as appointing Australian actress Janet Fielding in the role, was with one eye on appeal to the Australian market, a feat he later repeated in making companion Perry Brown American. Given her overall priority is to get back to Earth, few had realised that Tegan would go on to become one of the longest standing companions in the show, based on the number of years Janet Fielding played the role in the show. This was Nissa's second story, having featured in the previous story The Keeper of Traken in a guest role. Producer John Nathan Turner and script editor Christopher H. Bidmead saw potential in the character and as such was brought in as a companion for Logopolis. In The Keeper of Traken she was introduced as a young scientist who doted on her father Tremas, who at the end of the story had his body and appearance taken over by the Master. During Logopolis, she manages to send a message to the TARDIS requesting help to find her father, who has vanished. She eventually makes a physical appearance on the planet of Logopolis towards the end of episode 2, informing Adric that she was brought to the planet by a friend of the Doctor's, who turns out to be the Watcher, who at this point we are still unsure of who they actually are. She reveals to Adric she is looking for her father, but after some searching amongst the streets of Logopolis, she comes across the Master, who she mistakes for him, with the Master having taken on his appearance. Through this, she is manipulated by the Master, who gives her a bracelet, which gives him control of Nissa's arm, something that is put to the test when the Doctor reveals to Nissa that it is not her father, and the Master uses his device to get Nissa to manhandle Adric when he tries to stop the Master's sabotaging him. Eventually, the entropy makes the bracelet break apart, freeing Nissa from his control. She leaves Logopolis in the TARDIS with Adric, and whilst observing the monitor of the effect of entropy taking over the universe, she sees her home planet of Traken wiped out. This brings the notion of the Watcher bringing her from Traken to Logopolis full circle, knowing her home planet's fate. Like Adric and Tegan, she is present at the conclusion of the story to witness the Doctor fall from the satellite and regenerate. Unlike Tegan and Adric, Nissa's introduction and character development in the show is a lot slower, with the Keeper of Traken providing her an insight into her life and culture on her home planet, whilst Logopolis provides her with the purpose for travelling with the Doctor. The following season would see her establish her character as an intelligent woman with a level-headed approach to situations, acting as a balance between Adric and Tegan. This trio of young companions would stick with the Doctor for the course of the majority of the next season, all different in various ways, but all bonded by family loss and being far away from home. In Nissa, and to an extent Adric's case, rather permanently. Logopolis was Anthony Ainley's first full appearance as the Master, but second appearance in Doctor Who, following on from his role as Tremas, Nissa's father, in the previous story The Keeper of Traken, before assuming the role of the Master, with the character having taken on the appearance of Tremas after murdering him. With Logopolis, he spends the first 2 episodes hidden away from view, although his manic laugh is used to alert the audience of his presence. At the beginning of the story, we see him preempting the Doctor's idea of materialising around the police box by doing the same thing with his TARDIS, also taking on the appearance of a police box. Unfortunately, at the time of his materialisation, a policeman was using the police box to make a phone call, and as such, the Master drags him into his TARDIS and kills him. From here, he sets the trap and waits for the Doctor to materialise around his own TARDIS. Once the Doctor's TARDIS has materialised, the Master plays a waiting game while the Doctor is carrying out his measurements and solving the recursive dimensions issue from a TARDIS materialising around the TARDIS. During that time, he murders Tegan's Aunt Vanessa when she wanders into the TARDIS with the same manner he dispensed to the police officer, with his tissue compression eliminator, which shrinks his victims down to the size of a doll, killing them. Later on, he seemingly gains delight in taunting Tegan when she is lost in the TARDIS. Once on Logopolis, he leaves the Doctor's TARDIS and starts murdering some of the Logopolitans as a means to sabotage the Doctor's calculations in fixing the chameleon circuit, which causes the TARDIS to shrink. With the Doctor incapacitated and his companions and Monitor distracted in fixing the TARDIS, the Master sets about his sabotage plans with the Logopolitans' work in order for Monitor to reveal their secrets. This is done by placing a set of sonic stabilizers to suspend some of the Logopolitans from doing their mathematical work. As a result, this brings Logopolis to a silent standstill, as they are no longer chanting their mathematic computations. But as the Master tries to demonstrate his claim to hold over Logopolis, the silence remains when he turns his device off. This forces Monitor to reveal the secret work that was being carried out to hold entropy back from engulfing the universe, and entropy itself had already started taking its toll on Logopolis. The Master and the Doctor are left with no choice but to collaborate in stopping the universe becoming engulfed altogether by the entropy, but allowing the Doctor to find a way of reopening the CVEs to allow the entropy to pass through. The Master learns from what he gathered at Logopolis and decides to hold the universe to ransom when having the potential to close the CVEs off at will. As ever, his plan is scuppered by the Doctor shutting off the signal from the satellite permanently by ripping out the cable. As the Doctor falls from the satellite dish, the Master takes the opportunity to escape from security. Prior to Anthony Ainley taking over the role as the Master, we are presented with two stories of the Master in emaciated form due to him coming to the end of his regeneration cycle in The Deadly Assassin and The Keeper of Traken, with Peter Pratt and Geoffrey Beevers in the role. This representation of the Master was a world away from the portrayal from how Roger Delgado played the role during the Third Doctor era. Once Ainley took on the role to give the Master a humanoid appearance once again, it would have been easy for him to pick up where Roger Delgado had left following his final appearance in Frontier in Space in 1973. But instead, he alters the characteristics just as the Doctor would when he regenerates, and we are presented with a character that is easily as recognisable as the Master, but different somewhat in persona. Delgado's portrayal of the Master was suave, full of charm, and held a mutual respect for the Doctor while still being a murderous madman hell-bent on domination. However, Ainley's portrayal is colder, less sympathetic and unappreciative of the Doctor, whilst being pantomimed somewhat in his villainy. Additionally, he maintains some of the characteristics of his emaciated form by hiding away and controlling things from afar, as well as maintaining a love of disguises, like Delgado, and being right under the Doctor's nose, as we would see in subsequent stories. Regarding this aspect, the production team styled the first half of the story to give the impression that the Watcher is the Master, which is somewhat confusing given that the audience would have been aware of his new appearance from the conclusion of The Keeper of Traken. Ainley would portray the Master for the entire 1980s, and would go on to appear opposite the 5th, 6th and 7th Doctor, with his final appearance being in the final story of the classic series Survival in 1989. Logopolis was written by Christopher H. Bidmead, who was writing his first story for the show, but had also been acting as the script editor for season 18. The original concept for the story came about from the conclusion of the previous story, The Keeper of Traken, where in the climax of the story, the Master was able to escape his burning TARDIS due to having another TARDIS hidden inside. This concept takes up the majority of the first half of Logopolis, when the Doctor's TARDIS unintentionally materialises around the Master's, coupled with Bidmead's fascination of the TARDIS itself and how its interior hasn't really been fully exploited in the manner that it is represented in Logopolis. The influences that build up the story are taken primarily from Bidmead's interest in computers, with him also being a journalist in that field. The notion of block transfer and even the name Monitor all derive from computer terminology, which holds a certain irony given how Monitor explains that the Logopolitans don't use computers due to their computations having the ability to change the very nature of machinery. Physics also features heavily in the narrative, with the law of thermodynamics in regards to entropy, which in scientific terms is the measure of unavailable energy in a system, which effectively increases as a system becomes homogeneous. Additional influences also come from the Greek language, with the term pharos, as Tegan points out, being Greek for lighthouse, as well as the title itself, Logopolis, being a Greek term that roughly translates into English as City of Speech, and is a reference to the Logopolitans chanting their mathematic computations in the streets and narrows on the planet. As with a lot of stories in the John Nathan Turner era, there is plenty of self-reference into the previous stories, which was handy since this was a time when repeats were rare and VHS, DVDs and the internet were not yet available. This is done at various levels of subtlety, such as the Doctor referring to the chameleon circuit and Adric asking about Totter's yard, which was the location of the scrapyard the TARDIS was located in the first ever story, An Unearthly Child. There is also more immediate references to previous Fourth Doctor stories, in particular those that have taken place during Season 18, starting with the Doctor facing the prospect of returning to Gallifrey, which harks back to earlier in the season to the story Meglos, when at the conclusion the Doctor receives a summons, presumably to return Romana. On the subject of Romana, there is a final recognition of her staying behind in E-Space at the conclusion of Warrior's Gate, and how she has broken the carnal law of Gallifrey by becoming involved in a permanent sort of way. Further references to the E-Space trilogy is referred to when the Doctor learns from Monitor that the CVE the TARDIS passed through at the start of Full Circle was created by the Logopolitans. Given the story's close ties to the Keeper of Traken, there are also natural references to that story, in particular with Nyssa, and the notion of the Master taking over Treemass's body to bring back his new look. However, the biggest reference to previous stories is at the conclusion of Logopolis, when the Doctor is due to fall off the satellite and he has visions of previous adversaries from his adventures, such as the emaciated Master from The Deadly Assassin, a Dalek from Destiny of the Daleks, the Captain from The Pirate Planet, the Cyber Leader from Revenge of the Cybermen, a Sontaran from The Invasion of Time, a Zygon from Terror of the Zygons, and the Black Guardian from the Armageddon Factor. Once fallen, the call of Tegan, Nyssa and Adric brings about visions of previous companions from the Fourth Doctor era, including Sarah Jane Smith, Harry Sullivan, the Brigadier, Leela, K9, and both incarnations of Romana, which acts as a reassurance to him before he regenerates. This principle was reused for the Fifth Doctor's final story, The Caves of Androzani. Logopolis was directed by Peter Grimwade, who is directing his second story, following his first, Full Circle, occurring early on in Season 18. In terms of a directorial aspect, there is nothing standout in particular. However, his tendency to direct from the studio floor and to push the actors meant that he could have come to blows with Tom Baker, who was supposedly angry and wasn't taking comments or direction from anyone. One scene in which he particularly disagreed with and eventually got his own way was the scene in which the Doctor falls from the satellite dish, and he was originally scripted to scream, which Tom Baker suggested would be uncharacteristic and unheroic of the Doctor. This was a common trait of Tom Baker's, in particular during the whole of Season 18, which in retrospect he put down to the fact that he was leaving the show and had been in the role longer than any other of his predecessors. According to John Nathan Turner, once the regeneration scene was complete, Tom Baker slipped away quietly. With a large portion of the story taking place in the TARDIS and on Logopolis, the majority of the filming work was done in the studio. However, filming locations for Logopolis included the A413 in Denham, Buckinghamshire, for the scenes where both the Master's TARDIS and the Doctor's TARDIS materialise, and where Aunt Vanessa's car gets a flat tyre. Albert Bridge and Cadogan Pier in London were used for when the Doctor attempts to land the TARDIS in the Thames and meets the Watcher. Ursula Street in Battersea, London was used as a location for Aunt Vanessa's house, and in real life belonged to writer Andrew McCulloch, who had co-written the story Megalos earlier in the season. The main location shooting, however, was at Crowley Park BBC receiving station in Berkshire, which was used for the Forest Project on Earth for the climax of the story. Production design was carried out by Malcolm Thornton, with Logopolis being the first of 4 contributions to the show. The most significant design is with the planet of Logopolis itself, with the pink hazy sky and cream stone-looking buildings that form the streets where the Logopolitans do their computations, that looks intentionally bleak and cold, which goes towards the nature of the story. The disappointing aspect of the design work, though, is some of the background art, in particular some of the corridor shots of Logopolis, and in the climax of the story, when the Doctor is attempting to disconnect the cable on top of the satellite, there is the backdrop of the Master watching clearly as a still image. My criticism isn't necessarily towards the design, but more the limitations of the budget at the time and technology available. Music for Logopolis was provided by Paddy Kingsland, who is part of the new team that provided the music following the switch to synthesized soundtracks as part of the overhaul brought in by John Nathan Turner for Season 18. Previously, Kingsland had provided the music for Meglos, Full Circle and State of Decay already this season. As previously mentioned, Logopolis follows the new tradition of a synthesized soundtrack. However, to keep in tone with the story, Kingsland adds an organ to the music. Logopolis was broadcasted as 4 episodes from the 28th of February to the 21st of March 1981, as not only the final story of Season 18, but the final story of the Fourth Doctor era. Logopolis also marked as a changing of the guard for the show, and the completion of John Nathan Turner's overhaul to bring the show up to date for the 1980s. The story simultaneously ties up plot threads that had run through Season 18, such as why the TARDIS was able to travel into E-space, the ongoing theme of entropy, and the reintroduction of the Master. Bringing in new companions so late in the Fourth Doctor era was a gamble, with John Nathan Turner originally toying with the idea of bringing back either Sarah Jane Smith or Leela as a familiar face, but instead elected with 3 companions, which although meant narrative issues in supporting an increased amount of main characters, it allowed the opportunity to let the incoming Fifth Doctor, played by Peter Davison, settle into the role. A young-looking Fifth Doctor, complete with 3 young companions, gave the show a new youthful image that attracted new audiences, which showed in the ratings, with Season 19 being a noticeable improvement over Season 18. As for Logopolis itself, it's fundamentally a straightforward story of the Master's actions threatening to destroy the universe, but it is expanded to incorporate the Doctor attempting to make repairs to the TARDIS, and some scientific language thrown in for good measure, which were already a bit of a trend for Season 18. Had Logopolis have been left at that, it would have been possibly a forgettable story, but the important adage increases the hype of the story, as it's set up as the Fourth Doctor's departure. The acting from Tom Baker and script from Christopher H. Bidmead, coupled with the cold feel in the design work and Paddy Kingsland's funeral-like soundtrack, lets you know that the end is nigh for the Fourth Doctor, and for once the Doctor knows change is coming for him. Coupled with the permanent introduction of Nyssa and Tegan, Logopolis becomes an important story not only to end the Fourth Doctor era, but to suitably close off and address many key points of Season 18, and leading into a new era of Doctor Who that would have been a new experience for younger audiences. John Nathan Turner would carry on as producer throughout the rest of the 80s until the show's cancellation in 1989, with varying degrees of success. Christopher H. Bidmead stepped down as script editor at the end of Season 18, but would write the Fifth Doctor's opening story, Castrovalva, exploring the workings of the TARDIS even more, as well as the theory of block transfer computation. He would also go on to write one more story with Frontios in Season 21. The newly formed companion lineup would carry on for the majority of Season 19. However, the 3 main companions would soon become strained with the storylines, with the companions taking turns in playing a developed role within the narrative. By the end of Season 19, Adric had been killed off in Earthshock, Tegan would temporarily leave at the end of Time Flight, before rejoining Season 20's Arc of Infinity, and lasting until Season 21's Resurrection of the Daleks, and Nyssa leaving midway through Season 20 with the story terminus. So, that concludes my review of Logopolis. Of course, it is only my opinion, so feel free to express your own in the comments below if you think differently. Be sure to tune in for my next video, but if you do have a suggestion for a story for me to review, then just let me know. But remember, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.